The violin case pressed against Clara Brennan's ribs as the stagecoach lurched over another rut in the Nebraska plains, and she wondered if accepting a marriage proposal from a stranger 2,000 miles away made her desperate or simply practical. The April sun of 1877 beat down mercilessly through the dust-caked window, turning the cramped interior into an oven that smelled of unwashed bodies and leather. 3 other passengers shared the space, but Clara kept her eyes fixed on the endless grassland rolling past, her fingers unconsciously tapping against the worn leather case that held her most precious possession. She had left Philadelphia 6 weeks ago with little more than 2 carpetbags, her mother's violin, and a letter from Thomas Garrett, a rancher outside Silver Creek who needed a wife. The letter had been straightforward, almost businesslike. He was 32 years old, owned a cattle ranch with good water rights, had no family to speak of, and required a woman who could manage a household and did not expect poetry or romance. Clara, at 24 and facing a future as a seamstress in her cousin's increasingly crowded apartment, had written back within a week. She had been honest as well, telling him she was plain-featured, educated beyond what most considered useful for a woman, and possessed a stubborn streak that had driven off the few suitors who had shown interest over the years. She also told him about the violin. His response had surprised her. He wrote that he admired honesty and found stubborn women more interesting than simpering ones. As for the violin, he said he had never heard one played outside of a saloon in Omaha once, but the sound had stuck with him. If she could play, he would like to hear it sometime. He enclosed money for the train and stage passage. Now, bouncing across the prairie with every bone in her body aching and her dress sticky with perspiration, Clara tried to picture the man who would be her husband. His letters had revealed little about his character beyond a dry humor and careful penmanship. He had included no photograph, and she had none to send him either. They were going into this arrangement blind, trusting only in mutual need and the hope that respect might grow into something warmer. "Silver Creek, 15 minutes," the driver shouted from above. Clara's stomach tightened. She smoothed her traveling dress, knowing it was hopelessly wrinkled and stained, and checked that her dark hair was still pinned beneath her bonnet. The violin case received a quick inspection as well, ensuring the jostling journey had not damaged its precious contents. Her mother had played this instrument in concert halls across Europe before coming to America and marrying Clara's father. It was all Clara had left of her after the fever took her 10 years ago. The town materialized from the prairie like a mirage. Silver Creek was larger than Clara had expected, boasting a main street with wooden sidewalks, a 2-story hotel, several shops, a church with a white steeple, and at least a dozen houses spreading outward. Cattle pens stood at the edge of town near the railroad depot, and the whole place hummed with activity. Cowboys drove small herds through the dusty streets while women in bonnets hurried between shops with baskets on their arms. The stage pulled up in front of the hotel and the driver began unloading luggage. Clara climbed down carefully, her legs trembling from hours of sitting. She stood on the wooden sidewalk, violin case clutched in one hand and carpetbag in the other, scanning the faces of the men gathered around. "Miss Brennan!" A deep voice spoke her name, and she turned. Thomas Garrett was taller than she had imagined, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, weathered look of a man who spent his days working outdoors. His face was sun-browned and angular, with lines around his eyes that suggested he squinted into the sun often. Those eyes were a startling blue-gray, studying her with the same careful assessment she was giving him. He wore dusty work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat, and he held himself with a quiet confidence that made her feel suddenly small and uncertain. "Mr. Garrett," she managed, her voice dustier than she intended. He removed his hat, revealing light brown hair in need of cutting. "Welcome to Silver Creek." His gaze dropped to the violin case. "That would be the fiddle then, violin," Clara corrected automatically, then flushed. I am sorry, yes, this is it. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. I have got a wagon ready. The ranch is about 8 miles out. We can have the ceremony at the church tomorrow if that suits you, or we can wait a few days if you need time to settle. Clara appreciated his directness. Tomorrow is fine, Mr. Garrett. I see no reason to delay what we both agreed to. He nodded and took her carpetbag, gesturing toward a wagon hitched nearby. Call me Thomas. Seems strange to stand on formality when we will be married tomorrow. Then you should call me Clara. The wagon was sturdy and well-maintained, pulled by 2 patient horses that barely flicked their ears as Thomas loaded her belongings. He helped her onto the bench seat with a hand that was calloused and strong, then climbed up beside her. As they rolled out of town, Clara found herself acutely aware of his presence, the way his hands held the reins with easy competence, the set of his shoulders, the faint smell of leather and sage that clung to him. The ranch has been in operation for 6 years, Thomas said as they traveled. I run about 300 head of cattle, have 2 hired hands who live in the bunkhouse, and a cook named Miguel who will be glad to have someone else managing meals. The house is not fancy, but it is solid. Built it myself the first year. I am a decent cook, Clara offered. And I can manage accounts if that would be helpful. My father was a banker before he died, and I kept his books for several years. Thomas glanced at her with interest. That would be helpful, I manage, but numbers are not my strong suit. They fell into silence, but it was not uncomfortable. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, grass rippling in waves under the wind. Clara could see cattle in the distance, dark shapes against the gold-green landscape. Birds she could not name wheeled overhead, and the air smelled of earth and growing things. It was so different from Philadelphia's crowded streets and brick buildings that she felt like she had traveled to another world entirely. Can I ask you something? Thomas spoke again after a while. Of course. Why did you agree to this? A woman with your education could have found other options. Clara considered her answer carefully. I could have continued as I was, living on my cousin's charity and sewing dresses for other women to wear to parties I would never attend. I could have perhaps found work as a governess raising other people's children, but I wanted something of my own, a home, a purpose. Perhaps that sounds foolish. No, Thomas said quietly, it does not sound foolish at all. Why did you send for me? Clara asked. You could have courted someone local. There are not many unmarried women out here, and the few there are have their pick of men. I'm not good at courting, all that talking and dancing and trying to be something I am not. Figured an honest arrangement made more sense. He paused. And I am tired of being alone. The ranch is doing well enough now that I want to build something more than just a business. I want a family if that happens. A partner. His honesty touched something in Clara's chest. I want that too. The ranch appeared as they crested a low rise, and Clara caught her breath. The house was indeed simple. A single-story structure built of wood with a covered porch across the front, but it was larger than she had expected and carefully constructed. Corrals and outbuildings spread around it, and a windmill turned lazily near a stock tank. Trees had been planted near the house, still young but offering promise of future shade. In the distance, she could see the bunkhouse and more cattle grazing along a creek lined with cottonwoods. It is beautiful, Clara said, meaning it. Thomas looked pleased. The land is good here, water year-round from the creek. That is worth more than gold in this country. He pulled the wagon up to the house, and 2 men emerged from the barn. Thomas introduced them as Jack and Pete, hired hands who regarded Clara with friendly curiosity. Miguel appeared from the house, a middle-aged Mexican man with a weathered face and kind eyes who greeted her in accented English and looked genuinely relieved to see her. I show you the house, yes. Miguel said, is clean, I try very hard. The interior was indeed clean, if Spartan. The main room served as kitchen and living area combined with a large fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and shelves lined with basic supplies. 2 doors led off this main room. Thomas opened one to reveal a bedroom with a simple bed, wardrobe, and washstand. "This will be yours until after the ceremony," he said. "I will sleep in the bunkhouse tonight. The other room is my office, but there is space if you need it for anything." Clara set down her violin case carefully and looked around her new home. It was rough compared to what she had known in Philadelphia, but it was honest and solid, built by the man she would marry. She could make it into something more, given time. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to meet me." For all of this, Thomas shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain. "I hope it will suit you. I know it is not what you are accustomed to. I think it will suit me very well." That evening, Miguel prepared a simple meal of beef, beans, and fresh bread. Clara ate at the table with Thomas while the hands ate in the bunkhouse, and they talked about practical matters. The ceremony would be at 10 in the morning, with the minister and a few townspeople as witnesses. Thomas had arranged for a woman named Mrs. Henderson to help Clara dress if she needed assistance. They would return to the ranch after a meal at the hotel, and life would simply continue from there. "Is there anything you need for the house?" Thomas asked. "Things you want to order from the catalog or have sent from town?" Clara thought about the bare walls, the lack of curtains, the empty spaces. Perhaps some fabric for curtains. Books, if that would not be too impractical, and I would like to write to my cousin, let her know I arrived safely. Of course. There is a catalog in the office, and the mail stage runs twice a week. Order what you like within reason. After dinner, Clara excused herself to her room. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her best dress for tomorrow and carefully arranging her mother's photograph on the small table by the bed. Then she opened the violin case and lifted out the instrument. It was a beautiful piece, the wood glowing warmly in the lamplight, made by a craftsman in Vienna 70 years ago. Clara had not played since leaving Philadelphia, afraid of disturbing her cousin's household or drawing attention on the train. Now she tucked it under her chin, drew the bow across the strings, and began to tune. The sound filled the small room, achingly familiar. She played a simple Bach piece, letting her fingers remember the patterns, feeling the tension of the past weeks drain away. Music had always been her refuge, the one place where she felt completely herself. She did not hear Thomas return to the house, did not know he had paused outside her door. She only played, eyes closed, lost in the melody. When she finally lowered the bow and opened her eyes, she found him standing in the doorway to the main room, his expression stunned. "I am sorry," Clara said quickly. "Was I too loud? I should have asked." "No," Thomas said, his voice rough. "Do not apologize. I have never heard anything like that, not even in that saloon in Omaha. You play beautifully." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. My mother was a professional musician. She taught me from the time I was very young." Thomas remained in the doorway, and something in his expression had changed, softened. "Will you play something else?" So Clara played again, a folk melody this time, something with a lilting rhythm that made her think of meadows and dancing. When she finished, Thomas thanked her quietly and bid her good night, but the moment lingered with Clara long after she had put the violin away and climbed into bed. The way he had looked at her when she played, there had been wonder in it, and something else she could not quite name. She fell asleep to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie night, crickets and wind and the distant lowing of cattle. Wondering what her life would become in this wild place, morning arrived with golden light streaming through the small window. Clara washed with water from the basin and dressed carefully in her best gown, a dark blue silk that had been her mother's and which she had altered to fit herself. It was old-fashioned now, but still lovely, with careful stitching and good lines. She pinned her hair up in a simple style and was just fastening her mother's cameo at her throat when a knock sounded. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, who looked Clara over with shrewd but kind eyes. "Well, you are a pretty thing when you are not covered in trail dust. Thomas Garrett is a lucky man." "I am not sure about pretty," Clara said honestly, "but I am clean at least." Mrs. Henderson laughed. "You will do just fine out here, I can tell. Got some spine to you, that is what matters." She had brought a small bouquet of wildflowers, yellow and purple, gathered from the prairie. "For your hands. Every bride should have flowers." The ceremony was brief and businesslike, held in the small church with Mrs. Henderson, her husband Miguel, and a few townspeople as witnesses. The minister, an elderly man with a booming voice, led them through the vows. Clara spoke her part clearly, looking at Thomas as she promised to honor and keep him. He repeated his own vows in that steady, deep voice, his eyes serious. When the minister pronounced them married, Thomas kissed her cheek briefly, formally, and Clara felt the full weight of what she had done settle on her shoulders. She was married to this man, bound to him legally and in the eyes of God, and she barely knew him. But when Thomas offered his arm to walk her back down the aisle and she saw the quiet satisfaction in his face, something settled in her chest. He was a good man. She could sense that. They would find their way. The meal at the hotel was better than Clara expected: roast chicken and potatoes, pie for dessert. Other townspeople stopped by their table to offer congratulations, and Clara tried to remember all the names. There was the doctor, a thin man named Ashford. The mercantile owner Morrison and his wife. The sheriff, a grizzled veteran of the war named Cooper. They all seemed genuinely pleased for Thomas and curious about Clara. "You picked a good one," Mrs. Morrison told Thomas. "I can tell by her eyes. Smart eyes." "I know," Thomas said simply, and Clara felt a flush of pleasure. They returned to the ranch in the afternoon, and Clara changed into a simple work dress, not sure what to do with herself. This was her home now, but she did not yet know how to fit into it. She found Thomas in his office, working on accounts, and offered to help. He accepted gratefully, showing her the ledgers and explaining his system. Clara quickly saw where things could be improved, how entries could be organized more efficiently. They worked together for several hours, and Clara found herself relaxing. This was familiar territory: numbers and records and logical problems to solve. "You have a good operation here," Clara said, reviewing the figures. "Your profit margin is solid, even accounting for the drought last year." Thomas leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You really do know your numbers. I told you I kept my father's books. He said I had a better head for business than he did, though he would never have admitted it publicly." Clara closed the ledger. "With some adjustments to your supply ordering, I think we could reduce costs by 10%. Then you should handle it. The accounts are yours now if you want them." It was that easy. He trusted her judgment without question, handed over responsibility without hesitation. Clara felt something warm bloom in her chest, gratitude, and the first stirrings of respect for this man who would be her partner. That night, after Miguel had served supper and retired to his quarters, Clara and Thomas sat together at the table in the lengthening twilight. The door stood open to catch the breeze, and somewhere outside a mockingbird sang its complex song. "I should tell you," Thomas said carefully. "I will not press you for anything you are not ready to give. The marriage can be in name only, for as long as you need." Clara studied his profile in the dimming light. "That is considerate of you. I want you to be comfortable here, to feel safe." "I do feel safe," Clara said, and realized it was true. "But we are married now. Properly married, I mean. I would not ask you to live as a monk in your own home." Thomas turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "Only when you are ready." "I am ready," Clara said, and found that was true too. There was kindness in this man, and strength and honor. She could do far worse, and she wanted to start this marriage honestly, holding nothing back. So that night, when they retired to the bedroom that was now theirs to share, Thomas came to her with gentleness and patience. He was careful with her, mindful of her inexperience, and if there was no passion in it yet, there was respect and consideration. Clara held him afterward in the darkness, listening to his steady breathing, and thought that this was not such a bad beginning. The days fell into a pattern. Clara woke early to help Miguel with breakfast, cooked for the hands and Thomas, managed the accounts, and slowly began to make the house into a home. She ordered fabric from the catalog and sewed curtains for the windows, bright calico that brought color into the dim rooms. She scrubbed floors and organized cupboards and planted an herb garden near the kitchen door. Thomas worked from dawn to dusk with the cattle, mending fences and checking water sources and all the 100 tasks that kept a ranch running. But every evening after supper, Clara would bring out her violin and play. She played while Thomas sat in his chair, tired from the day's work, his eyes closed and a peaceful expression on his weathered face. She played folk songs and classical pieces, lively dances and mournful ballads. Music filled the house, transformed it from a simple structure into something that felt lived in and loved. "I never knew music could sound like that," Thomas said one night after she had finished a particularly complex Mozart sonata, "like a whole conversation happening without words." Clara lowered the violin, touched by his perception. "That is exactly what it is, the composer's conversation with the world. Play the one you played our first night again, the happy one." So she played the folk melody, and this time Thomas stood and held out his hand. "I am not much of a dancer, but that song makes me want to try." Clara set down the violin and took his hand, laughing as he spun her clumsily around the main room. He was right, he was not much of a dancer, but his enthusiasm made up for his lack of skill. They bumped into the table and nearly knocked over a chair, both laughing like children, and when they finally collapsed onto the bench together, breathless, Clara realized she was happy. Genuinely, unexpectedly happy. Thomas looked at her, his face flushed from exertion and laughter, and something shifted in his expression. "Clara," he said softly, and kissed her. This kiss was different from the chaste peck at their wedding or the careful intimacy of their nights together. This kiss had feeling in it, real feeling, the spark of something more than duty or respect. Clara kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his face, and felt the warmth spread through her entire body. When they finally pulled apart, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I did not expect this," he said quietly. "Neither did I. I am glad you came, glad you brought your violin, glad for all of it. So am I." 2 months into their marriage, Clara realized she was content in a way she had never been in Philadelphia. The work was hard and the conditions sometimes rough, but she had purpose and partnership and the beginning of love. Thomas had started to smile more, his natural reserve melting in the warmth of their growing affection. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie and spent his rare free hours helping her with projects around the house. They talked in the evenings, really talked, sharing stories of their pasts and hopes for the future. "I want to expand the herd," Thomas said one night. "Buy another section of land to the north. In a few years, this could be one of the best operations in the county." "Then we should do it," Clara said. "The accounts will support the investment." Thomas reached across the table and took her hand. I like the sound of that." The hands and Miguel had noticed the change too. The house felt warmer, more welcoming, and Clara made sure they knew they were appreciated. She learned to cook Miguel's favorite dishes and mended clothes for Jack and Pete. In return, they treated her with affection and respect, and the whole ranch seemed to thrive under the new energy. One afternoon, Clara returned from gathering eggs to find Thomas in the barn with Pete, discussing something in low voices. They stopped when she approached and Thomas looked uncomfortable. "What is wrong?" Clara asked immediately. "Nothing is wrong, exactly," Thomas said. "Pete was just telling me about a traveling show coming through Silver Creek next week. They have a stage, performers' music. I thought you might like to go." "A show?" Clara felt a flutter of excitement. "What kind of performers?" "Singers, dancers, a juggler, and they are looking for local talent to perform. Morrison mentioned it in town, said they pay $5 for an act." Pete grinned. "I told Thomas he should sign you up with that fiddle." "Violin," Clara corrected absently, her mind racing. "Perform in public." She had not done that since she was a girl, playing at her mother's side in small venues. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "You do not have to," Thomas said quickly. "I just thought you might enjoy seeing the show, at least." Clara looked at her husband, saw the hope in his face mixed with concern that he had overstepped. "I would like to see it, and perhaps if I could practice, I might consider performing. $5 would buy those books I wanted. Thomas's face lit up. You would do it? I would need to practice every day this week, and you would have to tell me honestly if I am good enough. You are more than good enough, Thomas said firmly. You are better than anyone who will be on that stage. So Clara practiced. Every evening after the dishes were cleared, she played while Thomas and Miguel listened and offered encouragement. She chose pieces that would appeal to a frontier audience, folk songs and popular melodies, nothing too challenging. She worked on her stage presence, remembering her mother's lessons about posture and expression. The night before the show, Clara was so nervous she could barely eat. Thomas noticed and squeezed her hand. You will be wonderful, I know it. What if I forget the notes? What if the audience hates it? Then we will leave and never think of it again. But they will not hate it, Clara. They will love it because you are brilliant. His confidence steadied her. She went to bed early but barely slept, running through the music in her mind. Silver Creek was packed when they arrived the next afternoon. The traveling show had set up in a large tent on the edge of town, and people had come from ranches and settlements for miles around. Clara clutched her violin case and followed Thomas through the crowd to the back entrance, where a harried-looking man with impressive mutton chops was organizing performers. Name, he barked when they approached. Clara Garrett. I was told you needed musicians. The man looked her up and down skeptically. What do you play? Violin. Can you read music or just play by ear? I read music. I trained classically in Philadelphia. That got his attention. Well then, you go on fourth after the juggler and before the singing sisters. Keep it to 10 minutes. No sad songs, people want to be entertained. He made a note in his ledger. You get paid after the show if the audience does not throw anything at you. Clara felt her stomach drop, but Thomas was there, solid and reassuring at her side. She will be the best act you have, he said calmly. The man snorted but waved them away. Clara found a quiet spot behind the tent to tune her violin while Thomas stood guard, keeping the curious crowd at bay. She could hear the show starting, the master of ceremonies introducing acts, the roar of audience approval or the occasional catcall. Her hands were shaking. Clara. Thomas knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. Look at me, you can do this. I have heard you play every night for months, and every time it is beautiful. These people will be honored to hear you. What if I disappoint you? Impossible. He kissed her forehead. Go show them what real music sounds like. When her name was called, Clara walked onto the makeshift stage on trembling legs. The tent was packed with at least 200 people, men in dusty work clothes and women in their best dresses, children squirming in the aisles. The lights were bright and hot, and every eye was on her. She tucked the violin under her chin, took a breath, and began to play. The first few notes were shaky, but then the music took over. Clara closed her eyes and let herself disappear into the melody, a lively Irish reel that her mother had taught her years ago. Her fingers flew across the strings, the bow dancing, and the music poured out bright and joyful and alive. When she opened her eyes, the audience was transfixed. She saw Thomas standing at the back, his face shining with pride. That gave her courage to launch into her second piece, a slower ballad that showcased the violin's ability to sing. She played with her whole heart, forgetting her nerves, remembering only the joy of making music. The final notes faded into silence. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the tent erupted in applause. People were on their feet, cheering, stomping their boots. Clara stood frozen, overwhelmed, until the master of ceremonies rushed out and ushered her off stage, grinning broadly. That was exceptional, Mrs. Garrett, truly exceptional. Have you considered a career in performance? Clara laughed, still dazed. No, I have a ranch to help run. Pity, you would make a fortune on the circuit. He pressed $5 silver into her hand. Come back anytime. Thomas met her outside the tent and swept her into his arms, lifting her off the ground. You were perfect, absolutely perfect. Did you hear them? I heard them, Clara said, laughing and crying at the same time. Thomas, they liked it, they really liked it. Of course they did, I told you. He set her down but kept his arms around her. "I am so proud of you." They watched the rest of the show together, Thomas's arm around Clara's shoulders, but nothing else came close to the magic of her performance. People kept approaching them, congratulating Clara, asking where she had trained and if she would teach their daughters. Clara answered graciously, still riding the high of success. On the ride home, Clara counted her $5 3 times, marveling at them. "I earned this, with my music." "You did. What will you buy?" "Books," Clara said immediately. "And maybe some sheet music from back east. I could order new pieces, learn them, keep improving." Thomas smiled. "Whatever you want." That night, Clara played for Thomas alone, a private performance in their home. She played a classical piece she loved, one of Beethoven's romances, slow and achingly beautiful. When she finished, she found Thomas watching her with such intensity it made her breath catch. "I love you," he said quietly. "I did not plan to. I thought this would be a practical arrangement, nothing more. But I love you, Clara. Your strength and your intelligence and the way you make this house feel like a home. The music is just part of it, but God, when you play, I feel like the luckiest man alive." Clara set down the violin with shaking hands and crossed to him. "I love you too. I think I have for weeks, but I was afraid to say it." Thomas pulled her into his lap, kissing her deeply. "Do not be afraid, not with me." They made love that night with real passion, real connection, and afterward Clara lay in Thomas's arms feeling complete in a way she had never imagined possible. This rough cowboy with his calloused hands and sunburned face had become everything to her, partner and friend and love. The next few months were the happiest of Clara's life. The ranch prospered under their combined management, with Clara handling the business side and Thomas managing the cattle and land. They worked together seamlessly, each respecting the other's expertise. The accounts grew, allowing them to make the purchases Thomas had dreamed of and some improvements to the house. But it was the evenings that Clara treasured most. After supper, she would play while Thomas listened, and sometimes they would dance, and always they would talk and laugh and simply be together. The violin had become the heartbeat of their home, the soundtrack to their life together. One evening in late October, Thomas came in from the barn with an odd expression on his face. Clara was setting the table for supper and looked up in concern. "Is something wrong?" "No, but I have been thinking about something and I want to run it past you." Thomas removed his hat and sat down heavily. "You remember how you performed at that show and how much people loved it, of course. Well, I have been thinking, we have space in the house and we could use a real sitting room anyway. What if I built you a proper stage? Nothing big, just a small raised platform in the corner with good light. You could practice there and maybe on special occasions we could invite people over. Give them a chance to hear real music." Clara stared at him. "You want to build me a stage inside our house?" "I know it sounds foolish," Thomas said quickly. "But you have such talent, Clara, and it seems wrong for only me and the hands to hear it. Not that I want to share you," he added with a slight smile, "but music like yours should be heard. And this way you could perform without having to travel or deal with those traveling shows." Clara's throat tightened with emotion. "You would do that for me? I would do anything for you, you know that." Clara crossed to him and took his face in her hands. "Then yes, I would love that." Thomas grinned, the boyish expression transforming his weathered face. "I will start tomorrow, should be done in a few weeks if the weather holds." He kept his word. Every spare moment, Thomas worked on the stage. He cleared space in the main room, built a solid platform 2 feet high and 8 feet square, installed it in the corner where the light was best. He sanded the wood until it was smooth as silk and finished it with careful stains. Jack and Pete helped, and even Miguel contributed ideas about lighting and acoustics. Clara watched the project take shape with wonder and love. The fact that Thomas would do this, would spend his limited free time building something purely for her happiness, made her fall even more deeply in love with him. The stage was completed in mid-November, just as the first cold winds began to blow across the prairie. Thomas installed oil lamps on either side and built a music stand to Clara's exact specifications. The result was charming and professional, a real performance space in the corner of their home. "Try it out," Thomas urged when the final touches were complete. Clara climbed onto the stage, feeling the solid platform under her feet, and unpacked her violin. From this height, she could see the whole room, imagine an audience gathered below. The acoustics were surprisingly good, the corner placement reflecting the sound beautifully. She played a joyful piece, one of Vivaldi's concertos, and the music filled the house like light. When she finished, Thomas was beaming. "Perfect," he said. "Now we just need to christen it properly with an audience." They decided to host a gathering the weekend after Thanksgiving, inviting townspeople and neighboring ranchers. Clara was nervous about performing in her own home, but Thomas's enthusiasm was infectious. They sent out invitations, and Clara practiced every day, preparing a varied program. Miguel helped her prepare food for the party, teaching her to make empanadas and his special spiced cider. Clara cleaned the house until it shone and arranged seating around the stage. Thomas brought in extra chairs borrowed from the church and made sure there was plenty of firewood for the evening. The night of the performance arrived with clear, cold weather. People began arriving at sunset, bundled in coats and shawls, their faces rosy with cold and anticipation. Mrs. Henderson came with her husband, as did the Morrisons and Dr. Ashford. Several ranching families Clara had met in town made the journey, along with the minister and even Sheriff Cooper. "Never thought I would see a concert hall on a cattle ranch," Mrs. Morrison said, looking around admiringly. "This is lovely, Clara." The house filled with people and conversation and laughter. Miguel served cider and empanadas while Thomas played host, clearly proud of his wife and their home. When everyone had arrived and been fed, Thomas called for attention. "Thank you all for coming out on this cold night. My wife has something special to share with you, and I think you will agree it was worth the journey." He looked at Clara with such love that several women in the audience sighed. Clara took her place on the stage, her violin in hand, and looked out at the gathered faces. These were her neighbors now, her community. Some of them had traveled an hour or more on rough roads to be here. The thought steadied her nerves and filled her with determination to give them something memorable. She began with a lively folk tune, something to warm up the audience and set a cheerful mood. People tapped their feet and smiled, relaxing into their seats. Then she moved into more complex pieces, showing the range of the violin and her own skill. She played a mournful Irish ballad that brought tears to several eyes, then a spirited Italian dance that made people want to move. For her final piece, Clara chose a Mozart sonata, pure and crystalline, technically challenging but emotionally accessible. She played it with everything she had, losing herself in the music, and when the last note faded, the room sat in perfect silence. Then the applause erupted, even louder than it had been at the traveling show. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering, and Clara saw tears on more than one face. Thomas was clapping hardest of all, his eyes bright with pride and love. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and conversation. People wanted to know where she had trained, how she had learned, whether she would perform again. Several offered to pay for lessons for their children. Mrs. Henderson hugged her fiercely and whispered, "You are a treasure, my dear, an absolute treasure." When the last guests had finally departed into the cold night, Clara and Thomas collapsed onto the bench together, exhausted but happy. The house was a mess of dishes and displaced furniture, but neither of them cared. "That was incredible," Thomas said, pulling Clara against his side. "You were incredible. Did you see their faces?" "I saw yours," Clara said. "That was all I needed to see." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "The stage was a good idea." "The best idea," Clara agreed. "Thank you, Thomas, for building it, for believing in me, for all of it." "You gave up everything to come here," Thomas said quietly. "Left your whole life behind to marry a stranger. The least I could do was give you a place to keep the best part of who you are." Clara turned in his arms to look at him properly. You did not just give me a place to keep who I am. You gave me room to become more than I was. I am happier here with you than I ever was in Philadelphia. This is my home now. You are my home. They sat together in the lamplight, surrounded by the evidence of the evening's success, and Clara felt a peace settle over her that went bone deep. She had taken a wild chance, traveling halfway across a continent to marry a man she had never met, and it had given her everything she had never dared to hope for. Winter settled over the prairie with cold winds and occasional snow. Clara established a routine of performing once a month, hosting gatherings that became the social event of the region. People looked forward to these evenings, a chance to hear real music and socialize with neighbors they might not otherwise see for weeks at a time. Clara's reputation grew, and she received inquiries from as far away as Omaha about performing, but she always declined. She had no desire to travel or pursue a professional career. This, playing for people she knew in the home she loved, was exactly what she wanted. In January, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Thomas on a snowy evening, both of them wrapped in blankets by the fire, and watched joy transform his face. "A baby," he breathed. "Clara, are you sure?" "I am sure. Dr. Ashford confirmed it this morning when I rode into town." Thomas pulled her close, his hand spreading protectively over her still flat stomach. "This is the best news, the very best news. You are happy then?" "Happy does not begin to cover it." Thomas kissed her softly. "A child, our child, I can hardly believe it." They told the hands the next day, and Miguel immediately began fussing over Clara, insisting she sit down more and eat twice as much. Jack and Pete treated her like spun glass, which amused Clara but also touched her. She had become family to these men, and they were clearly thrilled about the baby. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter and into spring. Clara's body changed, her dresses straining and then needing to be let out entirely. She continued to play her violin, though standing for long periods became more tiring. Thomas insisted she rest more, hired a woman from town to help with the heavy housework, and generally treated Clara like precious china. "I am pregnant, not dying," Clara protested one afternoon when Thomas tried to carry her to bed for a nap. "I know. But you are carrying our child, and I will not take any chances." His protectiveness was endearing, if occasionally annoying, but Clara could not truly complain when it came from such deep love. In early June, on a warm evening filled with the smell of prairie grass and wildflowers, Clara went into labor. Thomas rode for Dr. Ashford while Mrs. Henderson and 2 other women from town came to assist. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, but finally, just after noon, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Thomas, who had been pacing outside for hours despite the women's reassurances, burst into the room the moment he was allowed. He looked haggard and terrified until he saw Clara sitting up in bed, tired but smiling, holding a bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Come meet your son," Clara said softly. Thomas approached slowly, as if walking through a dream. He sank onto the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny red face peeking from the blankets. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son." "We have a son," Clara confirmed. "I thought we could name him James after my father, if that suits you. James Garrett." Thomas reached out and touched one tiny fist with a finger. Immediately, the baby's hand closed around it, and Thomas made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "He is so small. He will grow, and then we will wonder where our little baby went." Clara leaned against Thomas's shoulder, exhausted but content. "Are you happy?" "I did not know it was possible to be this happy," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. He kissed Clara's forehead. "Thank you for this, for everything. You have given me a family, Clara, a real family." The next few weeks were a blur of feedings and diaper changes and very little sleep. James proved to be a healthy, hungry baby with excellent lungs. Clara was grateful for Thomas's help. He had no qualms about changing diapers or walking the floor with a crying infant at 3 in the morning. Miguel cooked and cleaned without being asked, and Mrs. Henderson stopped by regularly with food and advice. When James was a month old, Clara felt well enough to pick up her violin again. She played softly, not wanting to wake the baby, and found the music helped soothe both of them. James seemed to like the sound, his eyes tracking the movement of the bow, and Thomas would sit and watch them both with an expression of complete contentment. "We should take a family photograph," Thomas said one evening. "Send it to your cousin in Philadelphia, let her see how well you are doing." So they rode into Silver Creek and sat for a formal portrait, Thomas standing behind Clara's chair with his hand on her shoulder while she held James. The resulting photograph showed a family, solid and real and full of love. Clara sent a copy to her cousin with a letter describing her life and received a response full of wonder and congratulations. As James grew from infant to toddler, the house adapted around him. Thomas built a playpen and later a small chair. Clara ordered books and toys from the catalog. The monthly performances continued, though Clara now had to work around nap times and feedings, but audiences did not seem to mind. In fact, many of the women now brought their own children, and the gatherings became family affairs. James took his first steps during one of these performances, toddling across the floor toward the stage while Clara played. Thomas scooped him up before he could climb onto the platform, but Clara had seen it, and her music faltered with joy. The audience laughed and applauded, sharing in the family moment. Life settled into a new rhythm, busy and full and rich. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. Thomas expanded the herd and bought additional land. Clara managed the accounts and the household and her music, somehow juggling it all with a grace that amazed her husband. They were partners in every sense, building something together that was greater than either of them alone. When James was 2 years old, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She continued her normal activities almost until the end, only reluctantly giving up her performances in the final month. The second baby, born in April of 1881, was a girl. They named her Elizabeth, after Thomas's mother, and she had Clara's dark hair and Thomas's blue-gray eyes. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and show her his toys. Clara watched her 2 children together and felt her heart might burst from happiness. "We have a family," she told Thomas one night, nursing Elizabeth while James slept in his small bed across the room. "A real, complete family." "We do," Thomas agreed, his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky I am. That you answered my letter, that you came all this way, that you took a chance on me." "I am the lucky one," Clara said. "You gave me a home and a purpose and love. You built me a stage so I could share my music. You gave me these beautiful children. How could I not love you?" Elizabeth nursed contentedly, making small, satisfied sounds. Thomas kissed Clara's temple and they sat in peaceful silence, a family complete and content. The years flowed past like the creek that ran through their property, each one bringing new challenges and joys. The children grew, James becoming a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and helping his father with the horses, while Elizabeth proved to be bold and adventurous, always into something. Clara continued to perform monthly, now teaching music lessons as well to a handful of local children. Thomas's ranch became one of the most successful in the region, respected for both its productivity and the quality of life it provided its workers. Jack and Pete both eventually married and moved on to their own homesteads, but they remained close friends, often attending Clara's performances with their wives. Miguel stayed on, becoming a beloved uncle figure to the children and a trusted friend to Clara and Thomas. When James turned 7 and Elizabeth 5, they added a new tradition to the monthly performances. Both children had inherited their mother's musical talent, James on the piano that Thomas had ordered from Chicago, and Elizabeth showing promise on a small violin Clara had bought for her. They began performing simple duets with Clara, and the audiences loved seeing the family play together. You have built something special here, Mrs. Henderson told Clara after one such performance. Not just a home, but a real center for culture and community. This whole region is better because of your music. Clara looked around the crowded room, at the faces of people she had come to know and love over the years, at her husband standing proud by the stage, at her children playing in the corner with other youngsters. We built it together, she said. All of us. This is what happens when people come together, when they share what they have and support each other. In 1884, Silver Creek decided to build a proper town hall with a stage for performances and community gatherings. Thomas was asked to join the building committee, and Clara was consulted on the design of the stage and acoustics. When the building was completed in early 1885, Clara gave the inaugural performance to a packed house. She stood on the beautiful new stage, her violin under her chin, and played with joy and gratitude for the community that had embraced her and the life she had found here. But even with the new town hall, Clara's home performances continued. People loved the intimacy of gathering at the ranch, the sense of family and warmth that pervaded these evenings. The stage Thomas had built remained the heart of their home, where music was made and memories were created. When Clara turned 35 in 1886, she took stock of her life and marveled at how far she had come from that anxious young woman on the stagecoach 12 years before. She had a marriage built on love and respect, 2 wonderful children, a home she had helped create, a community that valued her contributions, and her music, always her music, the thread that connected everything. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked her one evening. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the prairie while the children played in the yard. "Giving up the possibility of a grand career? You could have performed in concert halls, traveled the world." Clara leaned against him, comfortable in his embrace. "I have everything I want right here. I perform for people who love me in a home I love with a family I love. What more could I possibly want? I just want you to be happy." "I am happy, gloriously, completely happy." Clara turned to kiss him. "You gave me that, Thomas. You and this wild, beautiful place." As if to punctuate her words, Elizabeth came running up to the porch, her dress dirty and her hair falling from its ribbons. "Mama, James says I cannot climb the tree because I am a girl. Tell him that is not fair," Clara laughed. "Go tell your brother that his mother climbed many trees as a girl and suffered no ill effects. And tell him I said he has to help you or he will miss dessert." Elizabeth grinned and ran off, shouting triumphantly. Thomas chuckled and shook his head. "That girl is going to lead some poor man a merry chase someday." "Good," Clara said firmly. "She should. The world needs more women who know their own minds." More years passed, each one deepening the roots that held their family and community together. James grew into a young man who shared his father's love of ranching, but also his mother's appreciation for culture and learning. He announced at 16 that he wanted to attend college, to study agriculture and business, so he could help modernize the ranch. Thomas and Clara supported his ambition, proud of his drive and vision. Elizabeth continued to be a force of nature, riding like a cowboy and playing violin like an angel. She had none of her mother's shyness about performing, commanding the stage with confidence that left audiences breathless. Clara saw glimpses of her own mother in Elizabeth, that same fearless creativity and passion. In 1893, when Clara was 42 and Thomas 49, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a grand party at the ranch. Seemingly everyone they had ever known came, the house and yard packed with well-wishers. Clara performed a special program that evening, playing some of the same pieces she had played their first months together. And Thomas stood and told the assembled crowd how his life had truly begun the day a stubborn woman with a violin case stepped off the stage in Silver Creek. "I sent for a housekeeper and got a partner," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "I asked for someone practical and received someone extraordinary. Clara Brennan, Garrett, you have been the great adventure of my life. Thank you for saying yes." Clara set down her violin and went to him, kissing him in front of everyone, not caring who saw. The crowd erupted in applause and laughter, and someone started playing a harmonica, and soon people were dancing in the yard under the stars. Later, when the party had finally wound down and the last guests had departed, Clara and Thomas stood together on their stage, the same stage he had built 20 years ago. It showed signs of wear now, the wood scuffed from countless performances, but it remained solid and true. "I was thinking," Thomas said, "we should expand this, make it bigger. James is talking about bringing his sweetheart home from college next summer, and Elizabeth wants to perform more complex pieces that need accompaniment. We could build a proper addition onto the house, a real music room with space for an audience." Clara looked at him in surprise. "You want to build again? Why not? We did it once, we can do it again. Besides, this place is meant for music and family and bringing people together. We should make it the best it can be." So, at nearly 50 years old, Thomas began another building project. This time it was more ambitious, a full addition to the house that would include a proper stage with curtains and wings, seating for 50 people, and acoustics designed with everything they had learned over the years. James came home from college to help with the construction, and even Elizabeth pitched in, her enthusiasm making up for her lack of carpentry skills. The new music room was completed in the spring of 1894, a beautiful space with tall windows and honey-colored wood, and a stage that was twice the size of the original. Clara stood in the center of it, turning slowly to take it all in, and felt tears prick her eyes. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Thomas, it is absolutely perfect." "Had to be," Thomas said, coming to stand beside her. "It is for you." The inaugural performance in the new music room was a family affair. Clara, James, and Elizabeth all performed, along with 2 young men from town on guitar and harmonica. The audience filled every seat and stood along the walls, and the music that filled the space was joyful and triumphant. Afterward, people lingered for hours, not wanting the evening to end, talking about how lucky they were to have such a treasure in their community. James graduated from college that year and returned home to work the ranch alongside his father, bringing new ideas about breeding and land management. He married his sweetheart, a smart young woman named Catherine who shared Clara's love of books and music. They moved into a house Thomas built for them on the far side of the property, but they came for dinner several times a week and never missed Clara's performances. Elizabeth announced at 18 that she wanted to study music seriously, to attend a conservatory back east and develop her talent properly. Clara was torn between pride and heartache at the thought of her daughter leaving, but Thomas insisted they support Elizabeth's dreams the way they had James's. "Let her go," he told Clara. "She will come back to us, and she will be better for having seen the world." So Elizabeth went to Boston to study violin, writing long letters home about her teachers and fellow students and the concerts she attended. Clara read these letters over and over, remembering her own mother's stories of studying in Europe, feeling the circle of generations completing itself. The years continued their steady march. Thomas's hair turned silver, and Clara found lines around her eyes that had not been there before, but they were laugh lines, earned through joy and love. The ranch prospered beyond anything they had dreamed in those early days, and the music room became a genuine institution in the region, attracting performers from as far away as Denver and Kansas City. In 1898, when Clara was 47 and Thomas 54, Elizabeth returned home from Boston with her degree and a quiet young composer named David, who she announced was her fiancé. The wedding was held at the ranch, with Clara playing as her daughter walked down an aisle lined with wildflowers. Watching Elizabeth marry for love, seeing the same joy in her daughter's face that Clara knew had been in her own all those years ago, felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. Both children eventually settled near the ranch, James taking over more and more of the daily operations while Thomas transitioned into an advisory role. and Elizabeth teaching music and performing regularly in the music room with her husband. Grandchildren began to arrive, filling the house with noise and laughter and new life. Clara continued to play, though not as often as she once had. Her fingers were not as nimble as they had been in her youth, and standing for long periods was harder now. But when she did perform, the music was richer for all the years and experience behind it. She played with a depth of feeling that only a life well-lived could provide. One evening in early spring of 1902, Clara was sitting on the porch with Thomas, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the prairie gold and pink, and somewhere a meadowlark was singing its evening song. "You remember the day we met?" Clara asked. "When I stepped off that stage, holding my violin case and trying not to look terrified," Thomas smiled, his weathered hand finding hers. "I remember thinking you had the most serious eyes I had ever seen, and I remember wondering what I had gotten myself into, agreeing to marry a woman I had never met. Were you disappointed when you saw me?" "Disappointed. Clara, I was awestruck. You looked at me like you were sizing me up, deciding if I was worthy. No one had ever looked at me like that before," Clara laughed. "I was terrified you would take one look at me and change your mind. I was so plain, so dusty from travel. You were beautiful, you still are." Thomas squeezed her hand. "But more than that, you were real, honest. I knew within 5 minutes of meeting you that I had made the right decision." "It has been a good life," Clara said softly. "Better than I ever imagined it could be." "The very best," Thomas agreed, "and it is not over yet. We have years ahead of us, more music to make, more grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch together." He was right. They had several more good years, years of watching their family grow and their legacy take root in the community they had helped build. The music room remained the heart of it all, a place where culture and joy and connection flourished in the middle of the wild prairie. Clara played her final public performance in the fall of 1906, a special concert to celebrate the 30th anniversary of her arrival in Silver Creek. She was 55 years old, her hair more gray than dark now, her hands marked with age spots and the beginning of arthritis. But when she took her place on the stage Thomas had built for her all those years ago, surrounded by her family and the community she loved, the music that poured from her violin was as beautiful as it had ever been. She played the same folk melody she had played their first night together, the happy one that made Thomas want to dance. She played the Mozart sonata from her first public performance. She played new pieces too, compositions David had written especially for her, music that wove together all the threads of her life into something transcendent. When she lowered her bow for the last time, the audience sat in reverent silence. Then slowly, everyone rose to their feet, applauding not just the performance but the woman, the life, the legacy. Clara saw Thomas standing in the front row, tears running unashamedly down his face, and she knew that everything had been worth it. Every risk, every leap of faith, every moment of doubt had led to this, to a life rich beyond measure. Thomas and Clara lived out their remaining years in the house they had built together, surrounded by children and grandchildren and the music that had been the soundtrack of their love story. When Thomas died peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1912, at the age of 68, Clara mourned him deeply, but not bitterly. They had been given 35 years together, years packed with love and partnership and joy. That was more than most people ever got. She continued to live in their home, playing her violin for her own pleasure now, teaching her grandchildren the same pieces her mother had taught her. The music room remained a gathering place for the community, though others did most of the performing now. Clara was content to sit in the audience and listen, remembering all the performances she had given on that stage, all the music that had filled this space. When Clara died in her sleep in the winter of 1918, at the age of 67, the entire community mourned. Her funeral was held in the music room she and Thomas had created, and more than 200 people came to pay their respects. Elizabeth played her mother's violin, performing the same folk melody that had started it all, and there was not a dry eye in the room. The house and music room passed to James, who maintained them lovingly as a tribute to his parents. The monthly performances continued, a tradition that stretched on for decades, connecting generations of families through the power of music and community. Years later, when James was an old man himself, he would tell his own grandchildren about the day his mother arrived in Silver Creek, a mail-order bride with a violin case and more courage than she probably knew she possessed. He would tell them about the stage his father built, about the music that transformed a simple ranch house into a center of culture and joy, about the love story that unfolded there. And every time he told the story, he would finish the same way. Your great-grandmother took a leap of faith, traveling across the country to marry a stranger. Your great-grandfather built her a stage so she could share her gift with the world. Together, they created something beautiful that lasted far beyond their own lives. That is the kind of love worth building a life on, the kind that makes the world better just by existing in it. The violin itself, that precious instrument that had crossed the plains in Clara's arms, was preserved carefully through the generations, sometimes played but more often displayed as the treasure it was. It served as a reminder of where the family had come from, of the courage and love that had founded their legacy. The music room stood for more than a century, hosting performances and gatherings and celebrations, a testament to the vision of a cowboy who loved his wife enough to build her a stage, and a woman who had the courage to bring her violin across the plains to find a home. Together, they had created something that transcended their individual lives, a legacy of love and music and community that rippled outward, touching countless lives across the years. In the end, Clara's story was not about a mail-order bride or a cowboy or even a violin, though all those elements were essential. It was about the transformative power of taking a risk, of saying yes to the possibility of love, of building something beautiful together in an unlikely place. It was about how two strangers became partners, then friends, then lovers, creating a family and a community through their shared commitment and the music that bound it all together. The stage Thomas built remained standing long after both of them were gone, a platform for countless performances and a symbol of enduring love. Every note played on that stage carried an echo of Clara's violin, of Thomas's devotion, of the life they had built together in the Wild West. Their love story became legend in Silver Creek and the surrounding region, told and retold, inspiring other couples to take their own leaps of faith, to build their own stages for the people they loved. And so the music continued, generation after generation, a song that began with a frightened young woman on a stagecoach and a lonely rancher looking for a partner, and grew into something far greater than either of them could have imagined. It was a song of courage and love, of home and family, of the beautiful things that can happen when two people choose each other and commit to building a life together, no matter how uncertain the beginning. The violin that crossed the plains and the stage built inside a home became symbols of possibility, proof that love can flourish in the most unlikely places, that taking a risk on a stranger can lead to a lifetime of joy, that music and beauty and culture can bloom even in the rugged frontier, and that the best legacy anyone can leave is a family built on love and a community enriched by generosity of spirit. Clara and Thomas's story reminded everyone who heard it that the truest love is not the one that comes easily or without risk, but the one that is chosen deliberately, built carefully, and nurtured faithfully through all the seasons of life. It was a love that transformed not just two individuals but an entire community, creating ripples of beauty and connection that extended far beyond their own years. In the quiet moments, when the wind blew across the prairie and the sun set in glorious color over the land Thomas and Clara had made their own, some said you could still hear the faint strains of violin music drifting from the old music room, a ghost of all the performances that had graced that stage, a reminder that true love and beauty never really die but live on in the memories and lives they touch. The mail-order bride who brought her violin across the plains and the cowboy who built her a stage inside their home had created something immortal, a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of music and commitment, and two hearts brave enough to reach across the unknown and find each other. Their legacy lived on, not just in the family they created, but in the community they nurtured, in the music room that still stood, in the violin carefully preserved, and in the countless lives touched by their example of what love could be when two people truly committed to building something beautiful together. And that, in the end, was the truest measure of their lives. Not the cattle they raised or the land they owned or even the music performed, but the love they shared and the way that love radiated outward, making the world around them better, brighter, and more beautiful. They had taken the raw materials of a practical arrangement and transformed them into something transcendent, proving that the best love stories are not the ones that begin with passion, but the ones that build toward it, carefully and deliberately, until what started as an agreement between strangers becomes the kind of love that outlasts death itself, living on in memory and legacy and the endless, echoing music of two hearts perfectly in tune.